Very good afternoon, everybody. We are very pleased to welcome everybody virtually to SolarRoof Singapore 2021. Singapore has set a new target for solar energy, which aims to produce enough power by 2030 to meet the annual needs of everybody. So. Sorry, can you hear me? Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah, sorry, there was something wrong with the audio and it just went off. All right, a very good afternoon, everybody, and we welcome you all virtually to Singapore Solar Roofs 2021. And this event today, we will discuss Singapore Solar Roofs missions, key challenges and opportunities in PV rooftop segment, technology and advancement, and investors' perspective in commercial, industrial, and residential space. So first, let us start with the presentation on solar rooftop opportunities in Singapore 2021 by Lorenzo Menchini. He's Regional Director, Total Solar. Over to you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having me. I prepared a very short presentation, which is just the introduction for the conversation. Let me know if you can see my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the Singapore Energy Plan, as announced, calls for, amongst other things, 2 gigawatt-hour of solar, 2 gigawatt of solar installed capacity by 2030, and 1.5 gigawatt by 2025. This is a very ambitious target, considering that now the installed capacity in Singapore is around 400 megawatts. And also considering that Singapore has a small land space. The biggest challenge in Singapore is finding space to put solar panels. To give you an idea, installing the target 2 gigawatts on the Singapore land space, which is around 750 square kilometers, would mean having a concentration which is around 15 times the solar capacity installed in Germany per square kilometer, and Germany being the country which has the highest density. So it really is an ambitious target. This is what has been achieved until today, or until 2020. So as you can see, it's one of those cases where the government has been driving the initiative and coordinating the private sector, the public sector, all the stakeholders to solarize as much as possible. This is important because it's one of those cases where achieving 1.5 gigawatts in Singapore by 2025 would appear probably a dream in any other country. If it's in Singapore and the government is saying, it's very likely that they know what they're talking about and they'll be able to achieve it. So it's a bit more realistic. Okay. That being said, the solar is part of a wider picture because it will only still contribute part of the demand of electricity in Singapore. Singapore doesn't have natural resources such as coal or gas or waterfalls for hydro, so relies on import of the raw materials or the fuels for its power plants. Solar is one way of cutting that requirement or reducing that requirement for import of fuels, but it's only able to cover partial. As you can see, even a 2 gigawatt solar PV capacity installed would probably only cover around 15 or 20% of the total installed capacity. This is important because in terms of the generation capacity, whatever is achieved in terms of solar will still only be marginal in terms of the actual consumption of Singapore. Singapore consumes around 50 terawatt-hour a year of energy, and even 2 gigawatts of installed solar capacity would generate around 3 terawatt-hour a year. So basically less than 10%, probably 5% of the total energy mix. Okay, this is unavoidable because, like we said, there is not sufficient space to enhance even further the solar distribution in Singapore. This being said, what is important to note is that the electricity prices in Singapore are expected to go up. This is important because it's obviously the cost savings that the solar can drive, apart from the sustainability efforts, are a big driver to push the further penetration of solar. If I put solar panels on my roof and I have a cheaper price than the grid price, it's a very big driver for me to do it on top of the sustainability targets that I can help to achieve. And the expectations are for the electricity price in Singapore to go up in the coming years. There are different scenarios which are driven by a lot of different parameters because it's very difficult to do these kind of long-term forecasts, but pegged as they are to the cost of fuel or the raw fuels, they are definitely going to go up either very slowly or very fast, but the expectation is only up. This has been confirmed just a week ago by the Ministry for Trade and Industry, which has basically said that the government has introduced liberalization in the market back in 2015, 2016, as we know, and this has basically enabled competition amongst the GenCos, the generating companies, which has initially driven down the price, but now is driving out of the market some of the GenCos, and as a result, the marginal electricity price will increase. Okay. So the excess capacity is out of the market, and on the other hand, there is an increasing amount of solar capacity coming into the market. But as we know, solar capacity has the intrinsic characteristic of being intermittent. So it might be very high at midday, but it's zero during the night and cannot be easily predicted. This is the last slide, just to introduce a bit what I expect we're going to be talking about is the PPA, the power purchase agreement. There are different declinations of it, the roof rental, the ESCO, different names also. But the main driver basically, or the main structure is the same, whereby a developer, a solar developer will build and operate the solar system on the roof of the factory or the school or the whatever it is, and generate electricity and sell electricity to the tenant or the company underneath at a price cheaper than the grid. This is a model which has proved very effective in Europe, in the States, and elsewhere to enhance the penetration of solar, because basically it means that on one hand, the consumer doesn't have to do any kind of capex investment to buy the solar system, actually has a reduction in OPEX because the cost of electricity, which you would still anyhow buy, is cheaper than if he buys it from the grid. While on the other hand, the power plant is operated, built, maintained, and operated by a solar developer. So basically by a professional developer, because let's not forget that although simple compared to other traditional power plants, it's still a power plant. So to be operated efficiently, it's something which is easier to be done by a professional developer rather than by another company which has a different core business, and it's more effective for her to focus on its core business rather than diversify in power plants. This is just, that was the last slide. So this is just the very short overview, just to kickstart the conversation, I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Lorenzo, for very insights, great insights on the solar sector here. And ladies and gentlemen, before we start with the panel, there are a few polls that we're going to run. So kindly we have, can we have the first poll, please? So the first poll is, can we have the first slide? Do you think Singapore will be able to achieve its target of 2 gigawatt solar by 2030? So I repeat, do you think Singapore will be able to achieve its target of 2 gigawatt solar by 2030? So we have another 5 more seconds before we end the poll. All right, so I have the answers for that. 39% agree that very likely, 46% agree yes, likely, and 14% says unlikely. Interesting poll there. Can now we have a second poll, please? So the second question is, which segment will see more traction this year in the Singapore solar sector? So another 5 more seconds to go. So we have the answer for that. Now, 58% agree that it's rooftop solar, and 8% say it's ground mounted, and 35% of the people agree that it's floating solar. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for the poll here. Now we should start with our first panel. Our first panel is on smart solar rooftop solutions, market trends and policy outlook in Singapore. For the panel, we have our session experts, Mr. Eddie Tan, Vice President, Energy Transition, Sembcorp Industries, Mr. Jeremy Ong, Director of Business Development, APAC, Clean Energy Associates, Mr. Lorenzo Menkini, Regional Director, Total Solar, Mr. Nicholas Payne, CEO, Positive Energy Limited, Mr. Kareem Magherbi, Founding Executive, EPDA, Mr. Samrit Goel, Founder and CEO, Solar Horizon Private Limited. We have Mr. Kareem Magherbi, Founding Executive, as our moderator. So let me hand over the panel to sir. Can you take over the panel?
Thank you very much, Gita. So good afternoon or morning, everyone. So I'm very glad actually to be with all of you. I think I know most of you here in the first panel, so I'm glad to be among you guys. So I will just briefly introduce myself, and perhaps then you can introduce yourself one by one. I will just follow the order that I see on my screen, right? And then I can, we can have some discussions around a few questions regarding the topic, if that's fine with you. So my name is Kareem Magherbi. I'll be the moderator for this first panel. So I founded a company called EPDA based in Dubai, and my activity is sourcing projects for selected investors in wind and solar mostly in Asia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, and a little bit of Sub-Saharan Africa. To be fair, my expertise is more on the large-scale renewable energy, mostly above 50 megawatts. And today, with these incredible trends that we are seeing in the sector, transactions are even above 100 or 200 in portfolio of projects. So that's what I'm doing. But I could not miss the chance to be with all of you. so that's why it's a great pleasure to be with you. So maybe Eddie, can you just introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Kareem. We probably haven't met, but on a news clip involved. I'm Eddie from yeah, actually. So I'm Eddie from Sembcorp. I'm leading the energy transition team, overseeing the portfolio offerings under Sembcorp suite of sustainable solutions. This would include integrated energy, water, where we are unique. We also have a waste business to it, and the digital solutions to help customers meet their environmental sustainability targets. For the audience who are not based in Singapore, if you haven't heard of Sembcorp's headquarters in Singapore. It is an energy and urban development group and a leading provider of sustainable solutions. Our latest tagline is "Sustainability is our business," focusing on growing our renewables and sustainable urban solution business. Sembcorp today has a balanced energy portfolio about 12.7 gigawatt, of which about 3.2 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity in operation and under development. This is not just solar, but includes wind, storage, and our current business footprint in this area and in China, India, Singapore, the UK, and increasingly in Vietnam.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Jeremy, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jeremy. I'm the Business Development Director for Clean Energy Associates for APAC. Clean Energy Associates businesses in inspection services in the solar and storage segment. I'm driving most of the BD and pushing for engineering services where technical advisory is being led. CA is 13 years old. It's been founded by Andy Klum, based out in Shanghai. We've now had, I think, close to 75 gigawatts of solar and probably about 4 gigawatts of storage experience in testing as well as doing technical due diligence. So small but a growing business in that. We've got 90 engineers based out in China and a fairly large team also in the US, Asia and Europe, a little bit more spread out. I'm based here in Singapore and growing very fast. So it's a dynamic and exciting team, and very privileged and happy to be based here and being on this panel this afternoon. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Lorenzo, it's your turn. You're on mute. Yeah, good. No. You are still on mute, Lorenzo.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay,
now
you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, that's good. Yeah, I'm Italian. I've been in Singapore for 12 years and in Asia for more than 15. I work for Total. Total Solar is the renewable division of the Total Group, which is a French energy company. We are headquartered in Singapore and focused on Southeast Asia. So Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam, and India and Japan. For mainly rooftop solutions, so selling energy to corporates. We've been developing very fast in the region because this is probably the most dynamic market in that sense in the world. And I think it's also the most challenging. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lorenzo. Nicolas?
Thank you, Karim. My name is Nicolas Payen. I'm French, but I'm the founder of a fintech company in Singapore named Positive Energy. Positive Energy is some kind of marketplace where people who develop renewable energy projects of relatively small size can come and advertise their projects towards professional investors. And this investor can support this project by providing the capital they need in order to complete the development, finance the construction, or potentially purchase the asset when they are operational. We don't provide directly solar installation or technology to the end user, the people who consume the energy, but indirectly we help them to access the green energy without having to invest their own capital and means to do so. So we support energy as a service business model, which is very common in the solar rooftop industry, is the most preferred way of sourcing green energy. Very happy to be in this panel today.
Thank you, Nicolas. And last one, but not the least, Sam Reid.
Hey, thanks, Karim. Good to be here. Hi, everybody. I am Samrit Goyal, founder of Solar Horizon. We are one of the friendly neighborhood developers that set up back in 2014 in Singapore. We're one of the pioneers in the space who have really helped play our part with the Singapore solar story. We've been fortunate to have been supported by such a great industry and such a strong government. And we've been going wherever the sun shines and wherever our journey takes us. So over the years, we were one of the first companies to do solar PPA projects with some of the government-linked companies in Singapore who have helped pave the way forward for the private sector to embrace solar. We've also been one of the first to do similar projects in the Maldives, Indonesia, way back when. And our journey, as we see it, is just getting started because the market is booming. We have some solid investors with us. And I think overall, my message to everybody is the sun is shining, guys. Let's get involved and let's make something happen.
Great message. Thanks, Sam. So, well, let's start with few questions. So, Eddie, so Sembcorp has been doing really great actually in Singapore. It's every week or two or a month I can see in the news new PPA signed and new ventures and so on. So, but we saw also the presentation where we see that the potential for solar definitely there's a lot of constraint, right, in Singapore, obviously. So I can imagine that when you're dedicated to grow the solar business in Singapore, then you have to think about smart city and, you know, the connection between different sectors and so on. Can you tell us more about how you know you approach actually this business?
Thanks. Actually, funny you should say that. In fact, just today we at 12 or this morning we had an announcement that we have just got on board the new Solar Nova project. Over 1,154 HDB blocks under the new solar has been awarded to Sembcorp. So pertaining to this topic, I think going forward, solar panel will find itself integrated in buildings as part of smart city planning. And where I feel the current gap is the connection between solar and the architects who design the buildings, where we see a lot of the challenges that we accomplish, that the buildings are designed in such a way that aesthetic, but it's not ideal for solar. And for us to reach the goal of 2 gigawatt in 9 years time, a majority of this rooftop has to be made somehow compatible, at least have some ease of installation in order for us to reach that goal. So, and how this integrate with the smart city in the area, like there are new plans to bring in EV chargers. I think there are new plans by 2030, we're going to have 60,000 EV chargers, and how electric cars will bring around challenges or opportunities for solar, and with batteries out in the car park, can we potentially leverage on them to stabilize the grid or to perform some ancillary services with solar as a source of feed?
Karim, you're on mute.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And what about batteries? Is it something which is mandatory in all the projects that you are developing, or it's something that is optional?
It is optional now, but we are having one of the largest battery installation in one of our plants already, and it will be used predominantly for market participation. But because the same facilities will also have a solar and EV chargers, this is something that we will try internally to understand how we can potentially optimize the production of our solar. I mean, the idea is fairly simple, right? You have cheap electrons in the day, put in the battery, charge your trucks at night. But there are challenges of doing that. Where we see batteries today play a part in our network is potentially elevate the capacity issues. We do have limitations on our facilities in terms of the capacity of the incoming substation, and how we can potentially leverage on batteries to elevate some of these problems. As for how batteries would potentially find space in solar is when solar becomes a problem for the grid. And looking at 2 gigawatt, we are at 15%, we should still be reasonably okay. But time will tell if solar would present a problem to the grid, and that's when batteries will become viable on its own.
Thank you, Eddie. And so, Jeremy, how do you approach actually the market in Singapore in terms of structuring the transaction? I mean, do you see, any regulatory challenges that would impact, for example, the technical, aspect of the installation and so on? And are you facing more and more complicated or sophisticated transactions? How do you see the market evolving in Singapore?
So thank you for that, I think, interesting question. The Singapore market comparatively is, I think, not as large as some of the neighbors in Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific. I think there's interesting things happening locally. I think that there are some transactions that have been made by investors, regional investors, into some of the local developers, which is, I think, very encouraging to see that happen. I won't say that they are complex per se, but I would say that because Singapore is slightly unique in the sense that majority of the market is a rooftop market, and most of the projects haven't in Singapore haven't evolved from a perspective of project financing. Obviously, lenders and investors are trying to wrap their heads around looking at the portfolios, which are not the same as what you see in a utility scale project like 100 or 50 megawatt project, where most of them have evolved from a greenfield with project finance. So I would say in that sense, the complexity is just trying to be able to get lenders comfortable with the portfolio of distributed PV on rooftops, where when you see other markets as one singular large asset. So there are pros and cons. It's just that it's not usual in most lenders' approach to looking at, let's say, a portfolio of PV. So, but that said, I think that's been much more common in more mature markets like the US, in Europe, and in India. And I think this will continue to be something much more common than what we initially see here in Singapore. Yeah.
So do you mean that so far there haven't been any refinancing of portfolio in Singapore?
There is. I'm not saying there isn't. There are only a few usual larger developers in Singapore who has gone through that process. The fact of the matter is, when you're looking at investors who are looking at projects, they're not going to be looking at 1 to 5 megawatts. They need a sizable ticket to really. So it's looking at 30, 50 megawatts at a time. So I think the likes of Sembcorp, like Eddie, and the Sembcorp team are, I think, familiar with that. And I think this is, probably less common, and just a few players do get involved in such transactions. There are a few that I've seen in smaller sizes, 10 plus megawatts, but usually lenders would be more keen on a larger portfolio. I think that's easier for them to get through their business controls to invest in them. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so Lorenzo, I mean, I remember when I was in Singapore, and when you go on the top of a building, you can see actually the whole country basically. And I'm wondering how. I mean, there are few developers and few rooftop. I understand from Eddie that you have constraints, right, on the technical constraint to install. So how do you approach the market basically with your clients? Because I would imagine that you have a horde of people, running around and trying to find clients to sign PPA, and that the competition is fierce, right? So what's the idea here? How do you manage that?
Oh yeah, the competition is fierce, definitely, and the space is small. But I mean, it's tricky because the government is actively promoting and encouraging companies to go solar. No, so it's basically encouraging, for example, JTC, which is one of the biggest commercial industrial properties owner in Singapore, to solarize its facility, to encourage its tenants to solarize its facilities. But I think that in terms of CNI solar, so commercial industrial, which is the bulk, let's say, because there is only a certain, HDBs are fine, but HDB in the end, it's government driven, and HDBs, there's a lot of blocks, a lot of units, but very small roofs in the end. There's not much roofs. They are tall buildings, So for commercial and industrial, the biggest concern that a lot of the industries have, and the biggest hurdle, is the length of the lease that they have. The way that the retail or the real estate is managed in Singapore, it's on a freehold basis for a limited duration of time. Because then the government can, or JTC typically, can decide to redeploy it or request that it is redeployed and put to a different use. Which means that even most industrial installations have maybe 20, 30 years outlook maximum. Okay. Some time ago it was longer, it was 30 plus 30 automatically renewable, or 20 plus 20 automatically renewable. Now it's 20 or 30 with no automatic renewal, which is fine for a typical industrial concern. But if you have to go and engage and install a rooftop, it's a big limit, because what we need for a functioning PPA in Singapore is a roof for a long time. We don't really have much more requirements, but those two are crucial. And if the availability of the roof is not there for a long time, then this is difficult to overcome. Okay. But I mean, touching on what Eddie was saying, in terms of batteries, I think that it's true. It's very interesting, the potential for battery or energy storage in Singapore. But at the moment, I think the government policy, it's very efficient in the sense that you can inject electricity into the grid and get paid for it at USIP, and then withdraw when you need it. So basically, at the moment, the grid is acting as a big battery. You don't really need a battery in Singapore, because any battery that you install will be much more expensive than simply injecting into the grid and withdrawing when you need it. Except, like Eddie was saying, if you're looking at, I don't know, very high capacity, so demand charge or some kind of special applications, but that's a bit different, because that's not a large scale adoption, let's say. It's for focused applications, probably.
And do you see, I mean, I guess even within Total, actually, you have several lines of businesses. And do you see sector coupling with rooftop? I don't know, like, for example, smart meters, etc. Or are you only specialized? I mean, do you see the CNI business evolving into providing different services, or you keep this line of business and other will do the other parts?
I think that the aspect which is probably going to develop faster and which will probably drive energy storage, coupled with the CNI rooftop, is EV charging. Because the potential for EV charging demand is huge. The government has recognized it and is forecasting that from current 1,500 chargers, we are going to go to 28,000 in 2030. We need widespread charger installation. The problem is that if they are installed in the conventional, typical way at home or in the residential units, then basically the energy to feed to the chargers, to charge the cars, would be sourced from traditional power plants. So gas-fired or coal-fired, gas-fired. So it's not green. Instead, the chargers should be powered by solar energy, but then they shouldn't be typically at residential sites, because that's not where the cars are going to be during the day. They should be at commercial or industrial sites. So big companies which have a lot of space on the roof would probably need to look at, together with installing solar on the roof, installing chargers so that basically people can drive to work, get the car charged during the day with solar power rather than getting it charged at home. I think this is probably going to develop very quickly. One of our competitors is leading the path on this, I think, and but I mean everyone is doing it. Is something that it's, if you look at the configuration of Singapore, it's, the question is how come we don't have more EVs than, not how come they're starting to develop now, no?
Yeah, thank you. And so, Nicolas, I guess you know, you all the players, they at a point in time they come to you actually and say, oh, I have this nice rooftop project and I need financing or I need a partner and so on. And I don't know actually if that's the case because I don't know how concentrated it is actually the market. So how do you see the different players active in the CNI? Do you still have, you know, I would say consolidation of players and, you know, the key 5 or 6 or 4, you know, the big players taking the market, or do you see still, you know, smaller players trying to get financing? Because I understand from Jeremy that there's still not that much portfolio refinancing, right? So to get to the stage where you have your 40 or 50 megawatt and then you go to non-recourse financing, you still need to, you know, struggle and get more PPA. So how do you get there, and what's the profile of the players you see?
Well, we have seen few new players trying to get started in Singapore, and that has been very difficult for them. I think a lot of the new players prefer to go and look at other market in the region to get started than to get started in Singapore. Singapore is a very difficult market. I think the point mentioned by Lorenzo are very true. You know, the relationship between building owner and building tenant make the securitization of PPAs that are investable or bankable very difficult. At the same time, the big installation go through tenders, normal, by professional procurement team. And then, of course, the bigger players have a higher chance to secure the tender than the smaller one. So I would say it's a difficult market to get started in Singapore, and for the reason I just mentioned. Maybe two additional points. There was the survey done during the introduction, and there was other alternative. I think we mentioned ground-mounted and floating solars. I think floating solar may see further evolution if the latest 50 megawatt plan that is being commissioned provide good result during the first years. I think we will see much more of this project moving forward. I also think there is an opportunity to source energy from neighboring countries, solar energy being installed in Malaysia, or we are even talking about Australia, to import green electricity and offer it to the consumers, the end consumer, through utilities. I think that's a very good strategy for Singapore to decarbonize its grid, grams per kilowatt hours. To give you a comparison, in Europe, or across Europe, the average is 250, I think, or 280. So that means every time you consume energy in Singapore, you create a lot of carbon. So it's a very carbon intensive. And there is a lot of players now in the world that doesn't want to consume this energy anymore. And so you need to be able to provide them with green energy. And so it's become some kind of a very important point for Singapore to remain a competitive place for the industry and for the service industry. They will need to find a way to provide green energy to these customers. And here I see an opportunities with maybe import of green energy moving forward.
Thanks, Nicolas. So, you know, Sam, you've been in Singapore for quite some time, so I guess you saw the evolution of the rooftop sector, you know, since in the last years. And I'm wondering how the structuring of the maintenance, O&M, and the O&M and the organization of the big group to provide the necessary services. So how do you see the evolution and where we are now?
It's a good question, Karim. In fact, we'll be covering that in depth in the second panel, so I'll just touch upon it briefly. But look, as the distributed energy resources or DERs grow, you clearly have a bigger need for consolidated O&M. Frankly speaking, Eddie at Sembcorp would probably be better suited because they have thousands of small buildings. What we do is different. We focus on large corporates with large facilities where each project is 2 to 5 megawatts. And surprisingly enough, Singapore has a lot of industrial clusters that have gigantic rooftops. As an example, our last project with the government telco of our country was 2 football fields. It's 11,000 square meters of rooftop. So coming to your point about maintenance, I'll talk about it in that context, that, thankfully with solar, we get free washing every time it rains. And in Singapore, it rains a lot. So what we found is, rather than the physical maintenance of panels, which of course is critical and quite well established, I see the trend moving into the asset management side, to really look at having these digital solutions that are not just monitoring, but also using AI to benchmark against certain performance tests. So this is where the evolution is going. And we'll explore that in depth in panel 2. But one other point I wanted to add, which I'm really happy that my colleagues here today have made that in many ways. But to reiterate, increasing a market size from 0.5 gigawatt, which took 10 years. I started 10 years ago in Singapore, took 10 years to get to. It's going to increase by 3-fold within the next 9 years. And that is an incredible opportunity, right? And it's driven by EV charging, it's driven by floating solar, it's driven by additional public buildings, but it's also driven by off-site PPA. And that's one of the topics I hope we can bounce around between the panelists, because it is a very important trend, which is the merchant pricing model, open access model, where we are renting certain rooftops here and supplying them to the big tech companies there via the offsite or virtual PPA. And that's a great trend I'm hoping we can kind of kick about with this panel, who are all very well experienced in this space. So thanks. I hope that gives you some insights and answers your questions.
And do you have still so if you let's follow your idea, and do you see the regulatory framework actually being there for this virtual PPA? Is it there, or it's coming, or how do you see it develop in the next years?
Good question. Simply put, Singapore is Southeast Asia's first 100% open electricity market, right? It is incredible. We have a complete free market for all energy generators, retailers, and consumers. We even have peer-to-peer that's coming on, right? So to address your question, yes, the regulatory framework is absolutely here. The challenge, as always, is licensing and permitting. Yes, and I see some knowing smiles from some of my panelists. But the good thing with Singapore is that we have... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Sam. I think Singapore has the regulatory framework. You're spot on about the permitting bit to some extent. I say that because I was involved with the Sembcorp project together with PUB, the 60 megawatt and Tengah Reservoir, and that is a classic. Well, I wasn't classic, but that is a very good example about virtual PPA. Is not on-site consumption, is off-site to dedicated facilities. And so the framework's there. I think it is, the challenging part is also a combination of some of the things that have already been raised by our other panelists, where the challenge about lease, the roof lease, the tenure, that's very hard to overcome, the right size as well. And I would say that, my concern is not about space. Singapore, despite it being small, we have many roofs, but the problem is the tenure for the roofs, which are of a certain attractive size, usually gets limited by the lease itself. And I think I've seen recently where they're trying to get even 10 to 15 years to make PPAs, roof PPAs workable. And that's been tough. So with smaller developers who are trying to get into the space, trying to carve out a few interesting small projects that they can start taking off, even in this challenging COVID situation. So I think maybe not the electricity framework and regulation, but some of the other points that Lorenzo and Nicholas have really highlighted, and the likes of Sembcorp and a few other larger players have a little bit less challenge in that area, which is I mean that's how it goes. But I think yeah, it's not definitely not easy for the smaller players who are trying to navigate and to carve out. And I think a lot of it is also mindset with some of the asset owners. They do have the space, but trying to just make the decision to go green. Even I think it's not that it's just saving money. It needs to reach a certain return. So I think it's definitely not a straightforward market. I'm all of you who on this panel already knows that. Yeah.
It seems even for the big players, it's not that easy. I see Eddie and Lorenzo
Yeah.
actually saying that.
No. I'm not saying that it's easy. I think slightly different challenge. Bigger players have their own challenges to deliver the projects, because now that you've won it, it's now the manpower shortage, the labor, the speed to get it done. That's also another big challenge to overcome now with COVID, which we are trying to all get through. So no, there's no easy answers either way, whether you're large or smaller. Yeah.
Maybe one comment, because I don't want to be too negative on the forward of Singapore or solar in Singapore. I think there is a bright future for solar in Singapore, especially if some of the hurdles can be smoothened by regulatory change. But the electricity price is relatively high. I think that's what we have seen also in the presentation. So, when I see the latest capex level of solar projects that are executed in the region, you could be very confident that the savings that solar energy can provide to the end customers and also to the state, because the state is also a big consumer of energy, are things that can be hardly overlooked over time. And it will, the opportunities, the financial opportunities, is hard to deny. At one point you have to consider it, especially if you want to make big use of money. If you can do investment that provide saving and that are payback in 5 years' time, you should do it. You can reduce your overall energy cost in the countries, invest a bit of money, and you make profit after year 5. You have a regular cash flow from your operation. That's a fantastic investment that you can do as a business or as a country. So I think there is still a lot of
Nicholas, I absolutely agree with you. My vision, and I'm sure there's many of yours as well, is that within the next 10 to 15 years, we have aggressive and forward-looking government, totally solar and storage without gas, which maybe not some people not so happy to hear that, but the reason why our carbon footprint is so high is because we're just taking gas from 2 sources in the region. So I think if the government will want to take up the role to be the off-taker, I think that can really start and kickstart a lot of investment, because financial lenders would be definitely keen to back it up and on a larger way. So that's my view. I'm not sure that's the same that the rest of you see it, but I think that could really help snowball things.
Yeah, no, I don't very much agree, frankly speaking. in the sense that, like I mentioned, I think the government is doing everything it can to incentivize renewables, but unlike other countries which have hydro resources or wind resources, Singapore has neither. The only renewable as such is solar, which is also constrained by lack of space. So unless the expected projects for import of electricity from Australia or from Malaysia might be possible, although there are a lot of constraints. Australia seems a bit far-fetched to me, frankly speaking. The solar can only do so much, And from that point of view, I think Singapore, to some extent, it's a victim of its own success in the sense that it's been very successful in attracting all the big tech companies. I mean, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, they all have huge headquarters or huge servers in Singapore. And the servers that they have in Singapore are the biggest consumer of electricity by far. And okay, there's a lot that can be done in terms of energy efficiency, optimization of all different types, but still is a question that they are here because this is the hub for Asia Pacific, which is a certification of Singapore's success, the stability, the economy, all the reasons that we know very well. But the other side of the coin is that they consume a huge amount of electricity, and that can only increase.
And they all sign the RE 100, most of them. So they have their internal guideline that they need to run on 100% renewable energy.
Yeah.
I think people active in the solar rooftop have seen the credit for in Singapore going through the roof, mainly because Facebook has been buying them like crazy to comply with their company guideline. But
yeah, and I mean,
at one point, I agree. They may put the decision to put a data center in Singapore or somewhere else on the line. Then what do you do as a country?
Exactly.
Yeah, but this is the one point I wanted to just cut. I wanted to just come in here and actually offsite PPA, right? In order to be able to sell RECs to support your IRR, you need to have your own financing. A bank is not going to give you non-recourse project financing for a REC that has a variable price. Similarly, when you want to sell to an offsite client, you'll have to take use at risk for a while. And in fact, I'd love to hear from Eddie, actually, because you guys have a lot of experience in this, which is managing the offsite PPAs, and we'd love to get some insights, man.
I'm trying to consolidate all the views since like in every discussion, Sembcorp is kind of involved. So starting from the policies, credit to the Singapore government on JTC topic about lease. We are getting requests from many SMEs in the market, small and medium enterprise that own factories, building, coming to us to inquire about solar simply because the renewal of their lease is contingent to them putting something green on their roof. And so credit to JTC on that they do make this as a somewhat like a requirement that if you want to renew your lease for X number of years, you got to put solar on your roof, for example. That could help them really. Because that part is helping the overall industry in growing solar. I think there was a question about metering as well. Yes, there is quite a fair bit of room for improvement in terms of the metering scheme in Singapore. For example, like in a condominium and private resident, solar is not yet prevalent for a simple reason of the master sub agreement. If we were to put, quite simply to put it, is if we put solar on the rooftop or any condominium, we don't get paid if we send it back to the grid. That's how the metering scheme. So that part, and more even private residential building being solarized. And that's for the high rise. So we're already doing on the HDB part. As for landed houses, we have also scheme with we partner with OCBC Bank to provide financing for landed houses owner to put solar on the roof 1 to 5 years, up to $30,000. That's enough to solarize. So that part is also helping us to capture the untapped roof space that would help us bring about that 2 gigawatt target. As for virtual PPA, yes, again, duty as charged. Our HTV projects, our floating solar project at Tungga Reservoirs are all based on virtual PPA. It is something that we do and something that makes us successful in our way. And I think the regulation and the whole entire market actually support this virtual PPA. And you're absolutely right, we are one of the most open market in the region, and that really helped us to enable this. In addition to REX, we, again, duty as charged, we do have a REX platform that allow our customer to trade. So where green electrons are not possible, they could still greenwash their consumption with RECs. And today the RECs, local RECs are very in demand. Just as a comparison, local RECs are trading above $20. Where on international market you can get them for like $3 to $4. So that's how much in demand the local RECs are. We couldn't make enough of them, and I think the Singapore government is doing a good job in this space as well. They had put a moratorium not to allow any more data center to be built here until the data center can prove themselves to be more, they can decarbonize their footprint. So I think Singapore government is doing quite well in this front, and which is why we are quite beat up about the 2 gigawatt target. We think that yes, there are still areas that can be improved, but we think that with the small incremental step, we should be able to reach those targets once we try to capture more roof space.
Then, you know, that was a good point actually from Jeremy. And how do you get rid at the end of the day of the gas, right? Because if you have the potential which is constrained on the solar, what you do is the following: you have obviously the demand. You're going to manage the demand, so there will be a lot of, especially with this data center and so on. You do have a lot of experience actually with IA and so on to reduce actually the consumption. I saw even pilot projects where you have even 10 or 15% consumption less, even more sometimes. So you can play around with also price signals and so on to charge your EV at a certain time. And you have obviously all this isolation on the building and so on. So you do have a complete actually actions, set of actions to do to reduce the demand. At the same time, when you connect the EV, right, you also have the demand which may increase and so on. So altogether, I guess what's the, if you have this constraint on solar and you do have import, obviously that's one point. So do you see new artificial islands being built around Singapore? I mean, what's the plan?
If there is, I couldn't tell. Not on the platform like that. But I think one point that's probably left out in this conversation is the saving grace of hydrogen. Hydrogen in the green or the blue form making its way onto our shore. And the last I heard, they have reached some price point that might look attractive in 5 to 10 years time, and 5 to 10 years is not far away. So hydrogen could be a way to decarbonize some of our consumption footprint. As you're absolutely right, we are not able to get rid of gas. We need gas, or in the form of hydrogen, hopefully, and that could potentially be a big I would say a big kickstart in how we can decarbonize most of our consumption, or at least greenwash it with green or blue hydrogen.
So meaning that we would import hydrogen, right? Or I guess that's the idea, to import, no?
Yes. So we have heard all the stories about hydrogen. It is still not commercially viable today, I must give it that. But given the falling prices and increasing demand, we do see that it might become a possibility in I would say near term, at least mid to long term.
Just one comment about this. If you look at the overall efficiency when you convert green energy to hydrogen, and then you use it to power or load, okay, the efficiency is extremely low. And producing solar energy in somewhere in the region, like let's say Australia, put it into hydrogen, putting it to a boat, and carry it to Singapore, and then reconvert it in electricity to use it. I can tell you, put a submarine cable, a supraconductor submarine cable, and you will have 5 times more efficiency and less loss. It will be even cheaper. So I think hydrogen could be part of the solution, but it's not a silver bullet, and it's not a financially viable bullet today. So I think there is, if you really want to do change, big step to change your energy mix and decarbonize, you have other alternatives today that you can achieve very fast. And I'm sure there's enough smart people in Singapore to figure that out and put the country on this track if they want to do so.
Lorenzo, are you already knocking at the door for hydrogen?
He's already making some.
I think that probably I tend to agree a bit with Nicholas. I think that probably okay, the assumption with hydrogen would be that you have practically zero manufacturing costs, so you use energy at marginal cost in Australia, for example, a huge solar farm. But then you have a lot of costs involved in storage, in transportation, and so on. Obviously, I mean, that's the difference between a cable connection. Hydrogen would get rid of the intermittency problem, no? Because if you have a cable connection in Australia, that's great during the day, but at night you still don't have electricity, no? While with hydrogen, you can actually have it 24/7. So there is a big advantage there. But I think I mean, unless there's something I don't know, like Eddie says, it's still premature, I think. It's not commercially viable. And yes, 5-10 years is not a long time, but I think a lot of things can change, technically speaking, I mean, technologically speaking. So what kind of shape it might take, it's still very much, I think, I mean, from that point of view, I see the government embargo, the Singaporean government embargo on data centers, new data centers being built in Singapore makes perfect sense, I think, because why do they need to be here? I mean, why do they need to be in any urban space, let's say? They have practically zero employees. They could be sunk at sea 50 meters away from the shore, which would basically cool them down and would create a lot less problems. I see that as much more feasible in the short term to reduce the consumption. Definitely for cooling the data centers, which is the biggest consumption. Then probably, I mean, some ecologists will have something to complain about. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a perfect solution, but I mean, it's also a viable proposition, I think.
So, Samuel, have you seen, because you were mentioning this virtual PPA, but there are also very innovative ways to finance rooftop projects like, you know, with token. And do you see that in Singapore? Do you see tokenization of electricity or, you know, financing through Bitcoins for the small assets? Do you see that? Samarid, can you hear me?
Yes, hi. Sorry, I hear that.
Yeah.
Actually, I thought that was for Nicholas. I'm not a Bitcoin guy, but look, the issue is this.
Nicholas, yeah. this will be you. I want to hear
you. Nicholas, why don't you take this one? I just want to make one important point, one quick point, which is this. You know, for peer-to-peer or Bitcoin trading with electricity to be viable, we need scale. Each electron, if you're making a fraction of a cent on it, and you're trading maybe 300 kilowatt hour from your rooftop, it's a fun game. But if you want to get serious and use tokenization for real project finance for large scale megawatts, I think that's still a long time away. But I think Nicholas would probably have a better view.
Well, it's not a business, I mean. I'm just curious about it because I like the technology and I like new ideas. But peer-to-peer has been created mainly for people who own their building and who own their own generation and who have an excess of generation and want to share it in a community. I mean, we discussed that, but in Singapore, most of the buildings are owned by few large corporations. There is very few individual homeowners who have their own generation. So I'm not sure the business is really applicable. I started working on that 5 years ago, and I decided to move to something else. I think energy community are a real trend, especially in other geography like Australia, Spain, Europe, Germany, where you see people coming together, putting money in a pot together, and investing in their own generation and distribution to be able to produce and consume their own green energy, and that creates some kind of grassroots movement in Europe or in other place of people who, okay, we want to do something good together. Let's come together, put some money, and build something together. And I think that is really meaningful if technology can enable that and support this movement, along with the regulatory landscape. I think that we should welcome such kind of initiative.
Okay, Sangeeta, I saw your message. I think we have to conclude, right?
Yes, sir.
So I think, Nicolas, I think that was the great conclusion, no? The community, building the community around energy. I think that's a great conclusion. I don't know if anyone wants to add something. I guess we have covered, a lot of topics. Really thankful for, for moderating this session. I think it was very interesting. I took 2 pages of notes of what you said. This is really good. And thank you for everyone. Maybe Sangeeta, this is yours.
Thank you so much, all the key panelists, for your valuable insights. Karim sir, once again, thank you so much for moderating today's session. With this, attendees, we will proceed ahead with the last poll before we begin the panel 2. So here comes the last poll for you. Do you foresee storage coupled with solar a trend going forward in Singapore? Let's see what the attendees have to say. I'm closing the poll now. So we see around 70% of attendees agree to it. Thank you, attendees. So they do see storage coupled with solar a trend going forward in Singapore. Thank you. With this, we will begin the panel 2 discussion. The topic of panel 2 is going to be solar rooftop O&M, asset management, and energy storage opportunities in Singapore. Session experts who have joined us today are Mr. David Narang, who is the Managing Director from Syndicatum Renewable Energy India Private Limited. Mr. Samrit Goel, who is the founder and CEO from Solar Horizon Private Limited. He will also be moderating today's session. Mr. Deepak Ketarpal, who is the Chief Operations Officer from Southeast Asia from SunSource Energy. Mr. Yatin Premchand, who is the Managing Director from Black & Veck Singapore Private Limited. And Mr. Guy Ranjan Kohli, who is the Director, Energy, Renewables and Infrastructure from ARC Capital Group. I would like to hand over the session to Samrit sir to take the discussions forward with other speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Sangeeta. Good to be here with you, gentlemen. I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes. We'll keep it sharp and short. Just a quick round of introductions to the panelists. I'll just start with who's first on my screen. Devin, would you mind starting?
I couldn't hear you. I lost you somewhere.
Do you hear me? Could you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah, just wanted you to introduce yourself, sir, and a short introduction of
Syndicatum
and yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I head India. I'm the country head India for Syndicatum Renewable. Syndicatum Renewable is based out of Singapore. We have investments and we hold solar plants in Philippines, developing in Indonesia. In India, we are in solar and bioenergy, and we're looking to expand in other parts of Southeast Asia. So a very brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Devin. Yatin, you're next. Short introduction, sir.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thanks for this opportunity. I'm Yatin Premchand, Managing Director for Black & Veatch's Management Consulting arm. I manage along with our team, obviously, our operations for management consulting across Asia, Asia Pacific. And we are involved in multiple transactions, technical due diligence, and strategies around decarbonization, rooftop being one of them.
Lovely. Okay, Deepak, you're next.
Thank you, Sam. Very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Deepak Khetarpal, and I'm basically leading the geographical expansion of a company, SunSource India. It's a leading CNI company based out of India. Most of the countries that we are looking at are in this region are basically Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, and a little bit about Singapore also. But I will try and add whatever experience we have from these countries during the panel. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. And last but not least, my friend Gairajan, go ahead with the introduction.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Sam. Hi to all the panelists, Mr. Narang, and hi, Yatin. How are you guys doing? Lovely having Deepak also on the call. It's a very nice, lovely panel. Guys, to everyone, good afternoon. My name is Gairajan. I'm the director for ARC Capital. We are a mid-market investment bank. And we're one of the first efforts in Singapore to have a dedicated investment banking division for the renewable space as an independent investment bank, not as part of a banking, not as part of a commercial bank division. And to those who were here for the earlier call, you saw probably Nicholas as well. And Nicola and I, we started, I was part of his team to start with Positive Energy. So it's been a fantastic ride that we've had in Singapore, and happy to be part of this panel. And just because I'm an investment banker doesn't mean that I don't know much about the technical side. As Deepak probably knows, I've been on this space for a very long time, almost 15 years, Deepak and I, both in this space. And we both come from technical commercial backgrounds. I had my own EPC company in India. And so we understand this fairly well. Happy to be over here and happy to answer your questions.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. I mean, it's an exciting panel, guys. We have bankers, IPPs, developers, EPCs, consultants. I think between us, we've seen quite a lot in the industry. It's interesting that generally a lot of us are coming from a finance perspective, development perspective. And today we're going to talk about something I think that's a bit more technical, but also very relevant from our various businesses in the value chain. The three key topics we'll discuss in the next 27 minutes, 26, is energy storage. We're going to talk about pricing, trends, business models, and the relevance of that to our respective value chain activities. We're then going to go into digitization and automation. And that's why I'm glad Yatin is here, Deepak is here. This is a big emerging space, technology, and how do we enable our industry with that? And finally, we're going to dig into the solar O&M and asset management side. O&M is operation and maintenance, not so much from how do we clean panels, but from a perspective of portfolio management and how important it is for reporting, tracking, and monitoring. So with that, let's start with energy storage, batteries. The earlier panel mentioned, and there was quite a lot of talk about batteries in Singapore, perhaps not being so viable currently, but having a big trend with EV charging, the lack of arbitration opportunity, therefore the lower competitivity. But having said that, I'd love to, get your various views. And, this panel, let's make it a bit more engaging and not just necessarily everybody talk for 10 minutes, but let's talk, guys. We all know each other, and let me throw out some topics. Anybody who wants to come in, just be mindful of others and let's speak. So my first big question is this. How important is the focus and effort on battery storage with relevance to the Singapore rooftop solar market in the next 5 years? Anybody want to start? Go for it.
Well, let me take a shot at this, Samriddhi. I think it's a very important question. It's very relevant because Singapore still needs to improve on its renewable energy commitments. And as I also heard the previous session for some time, and very valid points were raised, like lack of space. It's a victim of its own success. And data centers is not the right thing for Singapore. But coming specifically to energy storage or battery storage, I think the world will see a lot of innovation in the next couple of years in terms of storage of electricity. I know you also spoke about hydrogen in the previous session, but battery storage, the new innovation on how to store it and where to keep it, even though there is lack of space. I read a very interesting article in one of the Future magazines, which it said that battery storage will probably be underwater going forward. Like you have data centers which are going under the sea, you would have an opportunity to store energy in terms of battery storage under the sea. Now, if that ever was to happen, then a lot of Singapore's issues around, rooftop or storage would be taken care of. And combined with artificial intelligence, and love to hear people about digitization and automation, as you've mentioned the other speakers, I think this will become the game changer for Singapore. And certainly, not only is more renewable energy required, but I think dependence on fossil fuels also need to reduce in Singapore, since it's landlocked and you have issues with Malaysia and Indonesia being border states with Singapore. I think setting up plants there to do transmission of electricity across the borders, I would see would become reality, as is the issue of water in Singapore, which also comes presumably from Malaysia. Getting electricity all the way from Australia was a question mark in the previous session. I'm still skeptical about it. But I think there is a huge opportunity for energy storage and new innovation. And going into the future, we'll see this reality. There will have to be some lifestyle changes. People will have to, reduce using fossil fuel electricity and consciously move towards renewables. Thank you.
Excellent points, Devin. I'd just like to pick out 2 or 3 good ones to then feed it to the panel, which is the AI and digitization, automation, which is another big topic for today. And also this point about importing energy versus generating ourselves and storing it for future use. Perhaps on that note, any of the panelists, maybe Yatin and Deepak, just because you're on my screen, to share your thoughts, and then we'll get to Guy Rajan.
I'd say, maybe I'll start, if that's okay, Deepak.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so in terms of importing energy, I mean, there was that mention, and I think it's quite well known that we don't have our indigenous power sources or fuels. However, there is ample land and sea around in neighboring countries, and that is something that Singapore is looking at pretty seriously, actually, in terms of looking at the market structures as well. There have been very recent tenders that have been put out by the Energy Market Authority, looking at how to restructure and sort of balance that and open up opportunities for importing, or should I say generating overseas and importing that electricity with a certain level of redundancy and certainty. Hydrogen plays a very interesting role in that, again, 10 years out, 10, 12 years out. Energy efficiency and the pillars that are already in motion with respect to sustainability to drive down the energy consumption are already at play. So there's a lot of synergy, between policy, regulation, consumer habits, the access to low energy consumption devices, for example, habits, etc., that are all sort of coming together after decades. And it is a matter of time, I'd say, within 5 to 10 years, and we'll see a lot of those targets being met, a lot of those ambitions taking place in a commercially viable sense, which is key. And obviously the displacement of certain types of fuels, or should I say the reliance of fuels based on legacy contracts, that'll open up the ability for to take advantage of this technology transition that's taking place. It's not just an energy transition. So it's a little wider than just looking at, solar, or looking at storage, or looking at, the transmission and capital generation. It's sort of, how they say, the energy of things, and actually how the financial incentives in terms of being able to lower the burden for adoption. I'm not talking about incentives as government regulation. I'm talking about ability to purchase. and build business out of that. And those hurdles are being lowered, just not in Singapore, but globally. Deepak?
Yeah, I think I would
just
like
before that, sorry, Deepak, just a quick one. I want to just pick out the really important point of commercial viability and cost and the ability for purchasing. If you don't mind sharing some thoughts on storage from that element, because you guys are building projects with storage, I'm presuming.
Yeah, no, we are not necessarily in Singapore yet, but yes, we are building projects globally in energy storage using different technologies, right? So it's not lithium is the answer for everything. There is an answer for everything. So it depends on what's fit for purpose. In Singapore itself, looking at storage, I mean, I think we've got a couple of years more. Regulation, arbitrage, all those things have to come out and play its part. Having said that, the way that the EV charging infrastructure is scaling up and the targets for 2030, you're going to have enough storage, I would say, for a decent amount of energy arbitrage if you virtually link it up. And you have the systems to do that, to act as one storage base to balance the grid and or store power. So does it make sense to go in and look at grid embedded storage at this point at hundreds of megawatts or gigawatts? Or does it make sense to wait and look at development of solutions that aggregates storage on wheels that does the same thing?
Mobile storage. Yeah, Deepak, would love to get your thoughts from an EPC and developer perspective. I mean, are you offering storage solutions to your clients? Does it make sense commercially? And what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think one thing that Yatin rightly mentioned is lithium ion is definitely the answer, specifically asking about the C&I projects. So in India, SunSource has recently won a couple of solar plus storage projects. So what we had really realized a few years ago that lithium ion was anyway on the same trajectory what solar was or has been for last 10 or 12 years. So cost was definitely going to come down. We were a little aggressive there in realizing that, and the cost that we've been able to achieve for these projects is something that is really exciting. It definitely comes under that window of affordability for our consumers. Definitely do. And in terms of other models, if I talk about a project that we're doing in Thailand, so there, as you know, net metering is not available, but we didn't want to waste energy being produced during lunch hours or during Saturday, Sundays. We realized, if we put in the storage there with our projects, we can actually increase our IRR by around 0.5 to 1% there. So from that perspective, also it is going to help definitely to C&I companies like us. Yeah.
Excellent answer, Deepak. Garajan, I'd like to get your views from a financing perspective. Like for Deepak just mentioned, right, that they can bump up the IRR by introduction of storage, possibly also increase the ticket size. Why don't you share some views from a financing perspective? What do you guys as bankers want to see in the evolution of storage plus solar in order to start financing this stuff?
And Sam, absolutely. What Deepak, Yatin have discussed earlier is on point. But there are obviously a few things which, and I think Devin might actually find it a bit more realistic when I say this. Bankers typically are not known for looking at what's the next thing that's coming on, right? They typically look and see, okay, that's been done for 20 years, 30 years. Now I'm ready to finance it. Thankfully now, however, the weight of this electricity transition that what we are witnessing in front of our eyes, most of that weight has been lifted already by solar. When it first came in as a new technology, most of the banks, and I'm sure everybody over here recognized this, most of the banks were not ready to finance anything, right? In Asia, ex-China, in Asia, India was the first country where banks are ready to finance something. And that's only because the Indian government went out and put a mandatory financing requirement. And that's also in 2015, right? 2014-15 is that's when that happened. So solar has already gone through that path of helping bankers and lenders identify how energy generation transmission can work on a PPA basis, right? We obviously do need to give Jigar Shah the hats off for that, for putting the first PPA in place back in 2008. But we are still seeing some areas, for example, Vietnam, where bankers don't really understand how PPAs will work, especially on a private basis. They still want government guarantees, which is not available from private developers and IPPs. So, but thankfully, like I said, most of the heavyweight has been lifted by solar and by wind in this region. And the bankers and lenders, they're looking at how storage is following those predefined paths and what else strategically developers and IPPs are doing when they look at risk. And this is something which I have also told to a lot of the other IPPs that have come to us, is that if you're not thinking of asset management from a risk perspective, you're not talking in the language of the right? And if you're talking from a technical perspective, oh, this solar plant is going to be this is fantastic. It's going to get gold plated, and I'm going to put platinum plating on it. It'll have tech that'll follow the sun. Okay, that's all well and good, but how are you managing it? How are you looking at risk? How are you pricing it? Right? All of that stuff, all of that O&M part of it, that gets slotted separately because it's supposed to be cheaper, right? And that's where bankers think, okay, you don't really know what you're doing. So this is now, I'm going to come to the real answer for you. You need to look at what Deepak just said, right? How are you putting strategically, how are you putting storage in? How do you put slight amount of storage so as not to increase the technology risk of types of batteries which have not been in the market for too long? But along with that, you need to look at the pricing at the cell level. What's really going on over there? What's the chemistry? Is it safe or not? What's the supply chain? A lot of the banks, a lot of the lenders are now looking at whether the supply chain itself is green, right? So if you're buying, let's say, somebody from CATL or some Chinese guys or somebody in India or somebody in Malaysia, if you don't really know how the supply chain of that battery has been developed, then you really can't tell the bank that, yes, you're doing 100% green. And right now, the bank's under a lot of that pressure. So you need to be careful of that. The quality of it, the battery management software, the performance guarantees, all of those things are now becoming extremely crucial. So if you're a developer, if you're an IPP, and that's what you're trying to put into the market, you should already have these things baked into your data room. If you don't have it, you're wasting time.
Yeah, that's a great insight and a great segue, to Devin, actually. I think, where I'm coming from the IPP perspective of asset management. So a couple of specific questions, Devin. Number one, are you guys considering any kind of larger scale storage deployments? And if so, how are you managing the risk from a performance perspective and a financing perspective?
I think the previous speakers have, raised some very important and exciting points. First, there was a question online. So the answer to that question is yes. I think Eduardo raised that question. So answer is yes. Now, coming specifically to your question on are we considering storage? We will consider, so from an India perspective, we will consider storage when it becomes easy for the consumer to pay for it. Because in India, if you want to do something, it has to be a cost which Indians can afford. We cannot have a cost which Indians cannot afford, because then, as bankers on this panel would say, they will never fund a project. So that is one. Second, yes, and I mean, since this is specific to Singapore, so I will not bring India into the picture. And we don't have any projects in Singapore at the moment. And as you're all aware, we are an owner-developer of renewable energy projects around South Asia and Southeast Asia. We would look at anything which improves the IRR, gives our shareholder profits, and which makes commercial sense. We are risk takers. We would take a risk, but a calculated risk. And yes, O&M would play a very important part of this. We are already looking at some technology which are using AI and algorithm-based technologies which can detect how you could improve efficiency of your plant. And if you actually look at going forward in the next 2 years, we would have solar panels which would improve, give you substantial improvement over the 20% currently. It can go up to 60 to 80%. These technologies are under development. We would see these technologies where homes would become generators of electricity, and that would become game changers. Now, how applicable it is in a multi-story building like in Singapore, or maybe in a Chinese shop house, is yet to be seen. If it becomes applicable, then it's a game changer, because each building will be a unit which will generate electricity, will probably store electricity, and that will become very easy for bankers and people to fund that kind of technology.
A really good answer, particularly from a lens of a Singapore suitability, right? I mean, one thing is putting grid scale batteries in Australia. The other thing is putting thousands of small batteries in thousands of small buildings. So in fact, that's a great segue for this last 8.5 minutes about the role of O&M, operation and maintenance, and asset management. I'd like to make it a kind of interactive for these last 7-8 minutes. So whoever comes first gets to speak. The question here is, what is different in considerations of O&M and asset management for battery storage, right, versus pure solar? What do we need to think about when it comes to maintaining our solar storage systems and monitoring and optimizing them? And please, the floor is open.
I'm going to jump in. Awkward silence. So the way we're looking at it, is, a solution, an asset performance solution that is AI driven, that has connectivity to existing BMS solutions that are already embedded in the O&M, right? And then we're also looking at it in terms of inverter level, and then into panel level, right, rather than just string. And with all of that and the data that organizations like ours have amassed over the years, right, on different panels, inverters, different types of storage, different manufacturers, etc., all the way down to the cell level, there's a fair bit of visual certainty that we're able to actually calculate through knowing the technology and building that then into these intelligence systems. Which then have also a human interface to be able to point out various anomalies that the machines might not be able to pick up or learn immediately. So it's several tiers or levels of build-up, if you will, of offering services, capabilities, and technologies, where we are actually, how do I put this? We are slightly moving away from O&M dependency and more into sort of the generic ability to be able to process, analyze, predict, and forecast. That goes all the way down to the level of being able to forecast when equipment's going to fail in the future, how much inventory you're going to need to carry for replacement. If you are replacing certain types of tech and that tech is not available, say in 3 to 5 years, what is the impact on that system? Forecast that now with respect to a level of certainty that reduces your risk and improves your return and improves your ability to actually finance that and maybe even gain some leverage on lending rates. So we're looking at that entire broader picture, the finance side, the insurance side, the tech side, the operational side, the developer side, and obviously the maintenance side, and kind of bringing all of those nuts and bolts together through the different collaborations, partnerships, solutions, technology, both in-house and external. We have to be able to kind of provide that level of clarity and granularity to make an informed de-risk decision that kind of locks in your dollar 3 years down the line, right? With a fair height. And that's kind of where we're moving.
Yeah, this notion of smart connected solar systems, right, where you have all various connectivity to the existing building monitoring systems. So I'd like to kind of maybe nudge Deepak from, again, an EPC developer's perspective, that how are you guys envisioning the role of smart connected solar systems, particularly with a view of, managing these assets and maintaining them?
Yeah, I think for all of developers, not just us, I think we've already moved from a plain O&M perspective to asset management perspective. We're already there, all of us. We've started, getting a lot of information, a lot of data about our projects. We anyway are living in this information era, and it really makes sense for us to basically, try and get those technology involved in the asset management part of solar as well. We obviously, as deeper we go in terms of getting data sets, right, from inverter to string to panels, as deeper we go, obviously it increases the cost. That's correct. But at the same time, The point is, the more data set we have and we get in the big data or AI technologies into play, we'll realize that, in the long term, we'll be able to manage our systems better. We'll be able to reduce the O&M cost. I don't know if you check the latest NREL publication on the O&M cost, it says that O&M cost is somewhere beyond 14,000 per megawatt, USD per megawatt, which generally is not something which most of the developers are taking nowadays. They're basically under 10 or 11. The point there was that nobody had really thought about the replacement of inverter parts some 5 or 10 years down the line. Now, as we go deeper into getting those data sets, not just for one developer, but a lot of developers, and Locus Energy and these guys are getting those data sets and providing those software platforms, you'll get to know about the best probability scenario of when you are going to get those replacements done. This will also come into play with your batteries as well. With batteries and cells are getting into there, you know about the cycles of lithium-ion batteries. It varies from the manufacturers. The more data set you have, the more AI, big data, all those things you get into play, you'll get a better sense of the replacement timing. And I think that's how we are also looking at things currently. That's what we're doing at SunSource India. About 100 projects are being managed at our asset management center. So, yeah.
Really, really interesting insights, Deepak. Thanks for sharing that. Particularly this big data and data analysis seems to be a big theme. And I remember when I started in 2014, there were maybe 25 systems in Singapore. Today, there's thousands and thousands.
And the more systems are
we've got about 2.5 minutes. I'll ask you
the more information we have. So it's a really good scenario, I think, for all of us.
That's good to hear. And Gairaj, in just about a minute, I would like you to just share, you have a lot of experience across the value chain. The big question is, what kind of guarantees do you as a banker want to see in asset management or O&M contracts so that you have comfort in financing them?
So most of the lenders are not going to recreate the types of guarantees that they're looking for. It's basically going to be the same thing that they see it in the solar panels. It's just the language is going to be slightly more strict, especially in terms of new types of batteries that are being put in place, or new types of technologies that are going in place in terms of managing the battery systems or managing the power storage and the release part of it. So it's basically going to be on replacement of technology, making sure the service is going to be done on time. And if there is going to be a downtime, then it has to be compensated by those whose equipment has failed, things like that, which are, again, very commonplace. It's very standardized. You just can't go and claim the moon when you don't even have a rock, basically. Right? And that's what a lot of the technology guys will do. So just be careful of that. Just because somebody's new, just because somebody has an IP on it, doesn't mean that it's fantastic.
Fair enough. So gents, we are at the last 1 minute. So I'd like to end this with everybody to just share maybe one key message of inspiration to the audience, just within maybe 15 seconds, about where we see the future of solar. Devin, sir, maybe start with you.
Well, future solar to me is very exciting. Just a word of caution, something which we've experienced, or all developers have experienced in India, is climate change. I think none of the seminars have actually realized this, that in the past 7-8 years since solar came into India, there has been, the irradiation levels have fluctuated, which has resulted in efficiency of the plants. So I think very exciting times for solar, very interesting things happening. But we need more effort in R&D to actually improve the performance of the module, because that's the base which gives you the efficiency. And therefore, everything else follows. So I think if that happens, which will happen, I find very exciting times for renewables globally. Very, very exciting time. There's lots of money to be made by bankers on this call.
Awesome. Great message. Thank you, Devin. Deepak, you're up.
Yeah, I would definitely like to agree with the point that this is a very exciting field, solar, adding storage to it in near future. And very rightly actually raised the point of climate change. There also, again, I'm not very sure about those, software or the platform being provided by other companies regarding reading climate change over next 20-25 years through AI and all those things. But maybe we can just, try and explore those options, whether they are really providing some insights for us to be careful of climate change while doing the yield estimation of our projects in future. Yeah.
Nice one, nice one. Gairajan, yeah, some key messages of inspiration and about the future trends of storage and digitalization in solar.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of solar, and as probably anybody who's read all the work that I've done in the past as well. To me, solar is one of three big S's. There's solar, there's storage, and then there's smart grids. Without the three together, we're not going to be able to get the entire transition. And even what Devin mentioned with pollution, there is definitely going to be an effect on solar plants, on solar projects in their generation. The same thing is going to happen with increased amount of heat that's coming in. So when you're building your plants, when you're having something that's going to be there for 20, 25 years, please don't make the mistake of taking whatever is currently the situation in terms of the environmental factors around the place. Always try to upsize it, because you don't know how strong the winds are going to be. You don't know how strong the floods are going to be. You don't know how strong the heat is going to be. So just be careful of that. And again, it's an oft-use thing. Sun is bright on solar, absolutely. Solar has proven itself. Storage is proving itself very well. Smart grids are proving themselves as well. So anybody who's putting their money in these three areas and doing it collectively, that's what I'm trying to do as well. Then, like Devin said, tons of money to be made, not just for bankers, Devin, but also for everyone. But yeah, I think anybody who's coming in, again, we are biased, but we have reason to be biased.
Fair enough. Nice one. And finally, Yatin, to just share some thoughts, particularly with the view on Singapore and where the trend is heading. Just a final key message.
Well, that's another S, but I was going to add sustainability.
Exactly.
But sustainability, I think, is the way to go across whether it's technology, whether it's supply chains, whether it's the business side, and an integration of all the systems. So I think looking at the digital front, looking at the risk and managing the long-term viability and sustainability of these projects is going to be the key for us to all, deal with climate change and obviously, scale up our ability to be able to manage our increase in demand. So solar is definitely
fantastic,
part of
man,
but it is sustainability.
Yeah, one of the key S's, just like Sam. Yay! Anyway, so guys, what a fantastic panel! I had a lot of fun moderating and listening to your views. I hope the audience enjoyed it. My last key message is: look, man, Singapore has been home my whole life, and it's the reason I started my business in solar. I'm very proud of our country and our ecosystem, how far we've come from a few megawatts to half a gigawatt. And while some of the panelists earlier talked about it being a small market, it's not. There's a gigawatt of rooftop awaiting in the next 5 years. As an example, Indonesia with 200 million people has some 20 megawatts. So guys, it's a great time to come to Singapore to start your businesses, to expand in the market, to really ride the wave of how the government is leading the way. And I hope we can all join hands and help our solar future become a reality sooner rather than later. So thank you all once again, and thanks to Solar Quarter. It's been a great panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you all soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you so much, all the key panelists, for your valuable insights. Samrit sir, thank you so much for moderating today's session. With this positive note, we would like to end today's virtual event. Wishing everyone a wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.